The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 6, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Michael Cohen returns to Congress. And so much for that. North Korea rebuilding missile test sites. Hate to say we told you so. And so much for that part two. Despite his obsession and promises, Trump has not only failed to close what he thinks is a problematic trade gap, he's exploded it. And meet the theocratic homophobe who will be on the federal judiciary until well past I am dead. In fact, meet a bunch of them. In the House, Dems delay vote on the anti-Omar resolution. Kristen Nielsen grilled by House Democrats. And Mitch McConnell will not allow a vote on H.R. 1 because it is aimed directly at corruption and voting difficulties. Meanwhile, Trump's rollbacks will increase CO2 by 200 million tons annually. And when it comes to disasters and chemical dangers, the EPA just doesn't want to know. And lastly, a Clinton triangulator finds a new center, or I should say, really lastly, Mike Bloomberg, we hardly knew you. All this,
I would have won, but, what are you going to do?
All this and more on today's Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. Matt is behind the board today. Matt, how are you? Matt. Brendan. Matt is not. I'm really...
Oh, I thought you were joking. I thought
No.
you were setting up a name
I'm
joke.
really
wow.
having trouble accessing things over the past day or two.
We gotta get you some neurotropics, I think.
I think
Yeah,
that's
bro.
probably what it is.
We need to
Oh, I
get you
didn't.
set
I didn't
up.
have my neurotropic this morning. I mean, I never do, but I didn't have my.
I think
do
Matt's
some
doing
crossword
well.
puzzles.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, John Benjamin was actually
Doing neurotropics?
no the answer to the New York Times crossword puzzle of the weekend.
Whoa.
That's pretty.
He
nuts,
has arrived.
right. That's pretty crazy.
That's
I
pretty
look
up there.
forward to explaining who he is to my grandparents.
Well, if
they do
don't
it every
know,
day.
then they could not get it. All right, let's first start with this. As we speak, Kristen Nielsen is lying to Congress, and this is really pretty shocking. We have a couple of clips. It's ongoing. But one of the things that she's complaining about is that and I don't know exactly how this is, but one of the problems, apparently, according to her, is that there's so many migrants coming that it's unfair to them to be able to look at their asylum claims. As opposed to, we just have specifically degraded the apparatus to, A, look at their asylum claims, B, we have narrowed the ability for them to claim asylum in a myriad of ways. That's not the problem. The problem is there's just too much demand, and it's unfair to the demanders. Here she is. I don't know what you would call this, just a performance.
To your knowledge, are you aware of family members who've been separated from their children and deported back to a country without their children?
Yes, sir.
Can you provide this committee with a list of those individuals?
I'm happy to do that with the one caveat that, as you know, that's part of ongoing litigation in Miss L, and as long as there's no privacy concerns from the court, of course, we're happy to provide that. A lot of the information is in the Miss L court with respect to each migrant. I would also just note that, consistent with longstanding practice in the law, before we deport any alien after they have gone through the process and receive a final order of removal, we do ask them if they would like to take their children with them. At that same time, their consulate or embassy, for purposes of issuing them travel papers, also asks them, would you like to be removed with your children as you're removed? As part of Miss L, the judge also asked us to go back and ask the parents again in conjunction with the ACLU, which we did. So there was no parent who has been deported, to my knowledge, without multiple opportunities to take their children with them.
I don't think so. There you go. Yeah, to her knowledge, all those stories you're hearing about that are all fraudulent, to her knowledge. They've all been asked. Really disgusting. The only thing that is in any way, the only thing that gives me any solace is the dry mouth that she has. Makes me indicate at least that she knows deep inside her that she is full of it. Let's just look at the first of the protests. There were young people who were there in a silent protest who ended up getting led out.
Including very small children.
Here it is. Here, there, you can see. And then there's a couple of, and there's a small child being held baby. And they are here as part of, while she's testifying, and they're being, I guess, ushered out of the room at this point. So some sense that at least there are people who are protesting this. And this is, of course, the Government Accountability or Government Oversight Committee in the House. And you know what that means. The Republicans have brought out their A-team. Here is what's his name? Cal Higgins? Is that it? Clay Higgins.
Clay Higgins.
Let's start with Clay Higgins, and then just sort of like, if you can, just shove him out of the way so that we can So here, put him up there. And this is Clay Higgins. He's from Tennessee. He's the one who couldn't quite follow the idea in the Cohen hearings that Cohen was looking through his boxes of evidence to pull stuff for the committee hearing, but it was boxes of evidence that had been collected by the FBI, had been sorted through by the FBI to determine what they wanted and what they were going to record, and then given back to him. Higgins kept saying over and over again, shouldn't investigators have this material? And Cohen kept trying to explain, no, they've had it, and they gave it back because they've already done their investigations. Apparently Higgins himself was in law enforcement and was not aware of this dynamic. But here he is.
I believe that.
Talking, yes, I do too. I believe there's nothing that Higgins says that I find beyond belief. Here is Higgins talking about the desperate migrants coming to the border, families, children. I heard that story the other day of police officers in El Salvador escaping the country because they were afraid. And here's Higgins explaining what this dynamic really is.
Let me just put this in context for the American people. Perhaps the most famous invasion in the history of the world, D-Day. 73,000 American troops.
Let's pop this baby up there.
Landed in the D-Day invasion. We have 76,103, according to my numbers, apprehensions along our southern border last month. We have D-Day every month on our southern border. Just to put this in context for America, yes, physical barriers work, enhanced technology works. Let me just put this in context for the American people. Perhaps the most famous invasion in the history of the world, D-Day. 73,000 American troops landed in the D-Day invasion.
Okay.
We
That's
have
it. We've seen enough there.
26,103 according.
There it is. Higgins providing us context. What's happening with these families that are walking up to the border hoping to get asylum is just like D-Day. That's the context that he wants there. It's like an invasion of tens of thousands of armed troops. Just sheer insanity that's going on with these Republicans and the border at this point.
Armed with dangerous workaholism, perhaps.
Right, exactly. They're coming with the most violent aspirations of their children of getting an education and working hard for their future.
They even have SAT prep books that they have translated into Spanish. I mean, this is like D-Day.
Just like D-Day.
Just like D-Day. In the same way that we want to make America just like Venezuela, people seeking refuge, just like D-Day.
Just like D-Day. Folks, reminder, one of the most important things we do for our health every day is brushing our teeth, yet most of us don't do it properly. Quip is a better electric toothbrush created by dentists and designers. Quip was designed to make brushing your teeth more simple, affordable, and even enjoyable. It has sensitive sonic vibrations. It's gentle on your sensitive gums. And the built-in 2-minute timer pulses every 30 seconds to remind you when you switch sides, guide you to a full and even clean. And here's the best part, in my estimation. Quip does not require a clunky charger. It can fit basically in your toothbrush holder on your sink. So you don't have the thing that's going to knock over and fall on the floor, and then your toothbrush is going to be dirty. The whole point, that happened. I'm
so
telling
gross.
you, been there.
Gross. Keep it clean with Quip.
That is my favorite part about the Quip, is that it's basically like a normal toothbrush, except for it's an electric. And electric toothbrushes, ones that have these pulses, are far more effective. And the whole point is you use them. In fact, and this isn't in the copy, but I just noticed that they have kids version now. So guess who's gonna get one?
Both
Not me.
of your kids?
Yes, both my kids. But I mean, they've been using a regular size. But now, Saul in particular, gonna get him a little small one. It's gonna be it's for his birthday.
Aw, Solly.
That's why I love Quip and why they're backed by over 20,000 dental professionals. Quip starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you get your first refill pack for free with a Quip electric toothbrush. Every 3 months, I should say, they send you a new brush head and a new battery and a new little thing of toothpaste too. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/majority. Also, support for today's show comes from Third Love. Third Love uses data points generated by millions of women who have taken their Fit Finder quiz to design bras with breast size and shape in mind. The results, a perfect fit and a premium feel. All you got to do is you simply answer a few questions to find your perfect fit within 60 seconds. Then, once you receive your bra, you can wear it, you can wash it, you can put it to the test for 60 days. And if you don't love it, you return it, and Third Love will wash it and donate it to a woman in need. It's all part of their 100% fit guarantee. This is hands down the most comfortable bra you'll own. It has straps that won't slip, tagless labels, and lightweight, super thin memory foam cups. They even have a line of incredibly soft and breathable cotton bras. I am not a bra wearer, but our official Our official Majority Report bra wearer says, I like they don't have a zillion options. It's easy to choose something quickly. The fit is great. I usually have to return most bras I order online, even though they're in my size. I ordered 2. Both fit. That almost never happens. Super comfortable for an everyday bra, but not as boring as most t-shirt bras. Subtle, cute details, so I don't feel basic. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone. So right now, they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/majority now to find your perfect fitting bra. Get 15% off your first purchase. That's Third Love. Spell it out. THIRD love.com/majority for 15% off today. So check those out. I should also say, before we move on to some other stuff I want to talk about, what's going on with Ilhan Omar, because this is just a real crap show.
Despicable, disgusting.
It's also just like politically shooting. The Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot. But before I do, yesterday was my sister's birthday, and tomorrow is my son's birthday, and I won't be here tomorrow. And so happy birthday to Julie, and happy birthday to Saul. Saul is turning 6.
Wow. That's amazing.
A lot of Pisces in your family, huh?
I had no idea. Is that right?
I mean, I'm a Pisces, and my birthday is March 9th, so I assume they are as
Aha!
Sam, you have a thing with Pisces. Something's going on here.
Well, I mean, my sister, and my son. But so
What's
happy
your
birthday
natal
to them,
chart, bro?
All right, let's get into this. We should probably just talk about Schultz too. We'll do that in a bit. I want to do this Ilhan Omar stuff. So today was the day that H.R. 1, that we're going to do the big rollout, right? H.R. 1, the first bill that the first House resolution won. This was going to be the first piece of legislation that the Democrats roll out. This involves all sorts of voting reforms, voter registration, campaign finance, matching funds, anti-corruption measures. A great piece of legislation that was not going to get passed in the Senate. In fact, Mitch McConnell has said he will not even put it up for a vote. But the value of this is basically to stick a flag in the ground, as it were, and say, this is what we intend to do the day that we take the Senate. It is an attempt to restore the protections under the Voting Rights Act. It is looking to restore voting rights for formerly incarcerated. It supports the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. There's redistricting reform. Unfair purging of the voter rolls stopped. Modernization and some type of consistency in voting across the country. There's a lot of very positive things in this bill. And Mitch McConnell, part because I think K Street is obviously super upset about this because it deals with lobbying and ethics overhauls as well. Mitch McConnell announces that the bill's not even going to get a vote in the Senate. And the reason why you're not going to hear that much about that story today is because, A, the press is pretty bad at covering Mitch McConnell. But B, Democrats are not spending the past 3 or 4 days or week, frankly, building up to this moment and hammering the Republicans over this. They're not gaining the advantage of publicizing how Republicans want to suppress the vote. The part of this bill also makes it a federal holiday for federal workers so that they can go vote. this voting reforms should have been a marquee package. That's all that we should be hearing about, particularly in the past couple of days. It's been a slow news days. However, they're not, because the Democratic leadership buckled. Maybe buckled is the wrong word, but has been insistent upon writing up a censure bill, essentially, to censure Ilhan Omar because of statements that she didn't even make, or statements that they have mischaracterized. And we touched on this the other day, and I wasn't going to bring it up again, but we got an email addressed to us in response to the thing that we talked about with Barry Weiss, who was commenting on this on The View. Okay, and put Barry Weiss aside. All right, she is
gladly.
But honestly,
she is my black swan, and I do not like her.
Right. Put her aside, because she's really a sideshow to this. This emailer writes that he agrees with us that claiming that criticism of Israel, much like criticism of France, cannot be considered inherently anti-Semitic. On this, I agree with you entirely. The problem with this offering, the emailer writes, offering this as a response, is that on not one of these three occasions that Ilhan Omar has been publicly censured for alleged anti-Semitism has she criticized a specific policy or conduct of the Israeli government. Instead of delving into the actual detail of where U.S. policy has gone wrong vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she chooses instead to peddle in anti-Semitic tropes about Israel's supporters in the U.S., be it invoking the image of Jewish money being nefariously used to control American politics with her AIPAC statements, or accusing Israel supporters of dual, this is a quote, dual allegiances or dual loyalty. I want you to note those two, everything that's been said there. The emailer writes, to be clear, it's possible to level legitimate criticism of the Israel lobby without falling into anti-Semitic thinking. However, that requires understanding the Israel lobby for what it really is, which is a loosely connected, often competing group of organizations across which wide ranges of spectrum of opinion on what Israel ought to be doing, what the U.S. policy towards Israel ought to be. It requires actual specific issues with what these organizations do, than rather than attempting to delegitimize support for Israel as reasonable in a democracy. He goes on to say, if you actively criticize AIPAC, you'd have no disagreement from people like me or Barry Weiss. Well, put aside Barry Weiss, because I think you're wrong about that. But totally wrong. But that's not the point.
Her dad's in AIPAC.
Like I say, I don't want to get caught up in that. In summary on this specific point, while criticism of Israel is by no means inherently anti-Semitic, full disclosure, I've actually been to the West Bank and participated in activism with the goal of ending the occupation. That doesn't mean it can never be. Goes on to say, you begin applying old anti-Semitic ideas that were previously leveled at individual Jews, for example, using money to control the world, and just transfer the target from the Jew to the Jewish state, you're getting to very tricky territory. All right, so let me show you how this guy has moved the ball in the same way that critics of Ilhan Omar have. Okay? Because Ilhan Omar was not criticizing even Israel in these statements. She was criticizing the fact that she is unable to criticize Israel without being attacked. And she is criticizing the fact that Congress would take up a bill that would punish people for supporting protests against Israel. She never, ever, ever uses the words, quote, dual allegiances or, quote, dual loyalty. And to the extent that she talks about anybody having loyalty to another country, she is criticizing not Jews, she's criticizing members of Congress. Let's listen to what one of the things that she said. Now, we know the exchange on Twitter where she's asking like why people are voting on behalf of AIPAC, and she says because of the money, which is exactly what Thomas Friedman said. Exactly. Although Thomas Friedman, to be fair, was far more explicit.
Yeah, and he also said people in non-electoral roles as well.
Yes.
It was explicit and broader.
He was explicit and broader. But let's listen to what Ilhan Omar said that supposedly involves. Well, first off, let's listen to this. This exchange here is on. Where is this exchange?
I-24.
On I-24, where the debate is happening as to what Ilhan Omar does. And this woman here, I don't know who it is.
She's on Fox News a bunch.
Okay, some Fox News person does exactly what the emailer does.
We're allowed to talk about the gun lobby, that we're allowed to talk about the oil lobby and the fossil fuel lobby, but only the Israel lobby we're not allowed to talk about. It's completely and utterly absurd.
That's absolutely not true. She attacked American Jews.
Ilhan, for example, calls for a boycott of Saudi Arabia. Does that mean she's anti-Muslim?
To this nation. That is not true, and I will have my say.
She never said anything about American Jews having dual loyalty. You are making this up. I mean, just have the decency. Can you cite it? When did she say that Jews have dual loyalty to the U.S.? When did she say that?
She said she questions citizens who have dual loyalty to the United States. I challenge you to produce a single fact that she made that reference. She said
what did she say?
She said that she challenges those citizens who have dual loyalty and conflicted loyalty to the United States.
That is utterly ridiculous. She has never made that comment.
Okay, so she didn't use the word citizens. She didn't use the word dual loyalty. Listen to this.
And what I am fearful of is that because Rashida and I are Muslim, that a lot of our Jewish colleagues, a lot of our constituents, a lot of our allies go to thinking that everything we say about Israel to be an anti-Semitic because we are Muslim. And so to me, it's something that becomes designed to end the debate. Because you get in this space of, yes, right? Like, I know what intolerance looks like, and I'm sensitive when someone says the words you use, Ilhan, are resemblance of intolerance. And I am cautious of that, and I feel pained by that. But it almost as if every single time we say something, regardless of what it is we say, that is supposed to be about foreign policy, our engagement, our advocacy about ending oppression, or the freeing of every human life and wanting dignity, we get to be labeled in something, and that ends the discussion because we end up defending that, and nobody ever gets to have the broader debate of what is happening with Palestine.
Okay, so here she's just simply talking about the fact that she is subject to critiques because she is Muslim. And she is automatically considered suspect. Do we have the other clip where she talks about, specifically where she talks about people being loyal to the other country? I don't think she said that in there, did she?
I think my understanding is that that's the clip that they're extrapolating that from.
She doesn't say about another loyalty, does she?
That's certainly not what I heard.
No, there's another one, I think, where she said, but she never uses the word dual loyalty. She never uses the word that in regards to Jews.
No,
I know where the exchange is. I think that was written, actually. Hold on for a second. Paul Waldman has written very well about this, actually. And she said, okay, I should not be expected to have allegiance, pledge support to a foreign country in order to serve my country in Congress or serve on my committee. So she's not referring to Jews having that. She's saying that I should not be expected to have that. She's not even she's referring to Congress people. She's referring to herself as a congressperson. Here it is. Here is the tweet. Our democracy is built on debate, Congresswoman. She's responding to Nita Lowey. I should not be expected to have allegiance / pledge support to a foreign country in order to serve my country in Congress or serve on committee. The people of the 5th elected me to serve their interests. I'm sure we agree on that. She's not implying that Jews have this dual allegiance, because let's face it, as Paul Waldman points out, for decades now, the vast majority of Jews in this country are critical of Israel. That the most amount of support in terms of citizenry in this country comes from Christian evangelicals.
Yeah, and plenty of Jews in Israel are also critical
That's
of
true.
Israel.
But in the context of Americans, she's not even talking about actual citizens or average citizens. She's talking about Congress people. And when she talks about signing a pledge, how many people listening to me now, and this emailer who has emailed me, it's from Britain, are aware that in half the states in this country, you must sign a pledge if you are getting a contract with the state that you will not participate in a protest against Israel. This is not a joke. There was a lawsuit that was brought by a Texas woman who provides speech pathology services to the school, and she had to sign a pledge in Texas that she would not participate in BDS if she was going to take this job. There is a, where was it? In Arkansas.
Small town newspaper,
a
small
newspaper.
indie newspaper.
The very
Jewish-oriented
Jewish-oriented state of Arkansas.
The Little Rock's Arkansas Times. The owner, Alan Leverett. I don't know if Leverett is Jewish or not. But the University of Arkansas Pulaski Technical College would not advertise in the Arkansas Times unless Leverett signed a pledge that his business does not boycott Israel. Now, Leverett does not boycott Israel, but he considers a state law that forces him to pledge not to boycott Israel unconstitutional. That's what she's referring to. And we mentioned that the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot because they're not talking about H.R. 1 this week. Well, S.R. 1 was a bill brought up in the Senate to federalize this ban so that it's not just the 27 states, it is the entire country. You cannot have a contract with the federal government unless you pledge not to boycott Israel. I mean, this is bizarre.
Well, it's an actual assault on free speech in the actual world.
A dramatic assault on free speech.
It kind of makes me think that BDS might actually work on some level.
Let's put that aside because that's wholly irrelevant. The effectiveness of it, whether people are supported or not, the idea that you would have to pledge to not protest a foreign country, or this country for that matter, or anything for that matter, is absurd. And when she calls that out, she is smeared as saying that Jews have a dual loyalty to their country. No, she's saying I shouldn't be forced as a member of Congress. And frankly, none of the citizens in the country should be forced to pledge allegiance to not protesting against Israel. I mean, regardless of whether you think there is a comparison or not with South Africa, the idea that people would have been, that you could not do business with the federal or state government if you protested against South Africa 30 some odd years ago would be laughed out of the room, particularly by Democrats. So at the expense of a marquee bill, the Democrats decided to bring up this, essentially to codify this smear against one of their, frankly, rising stars. And it's incredibly disingenuous. And I will add this, that I took this critique from this email, even though it was doing exactly what the smear is. She never says dual allegiances, quote, unquote. She never says dual loyalty, quote, unquote. She never's talking about Jews. She's talking about congresspeople and herself being expected to do this. She doesn't talk about Jews whatsoever. In fact, Jews, that smear of Jews that they had dual loyalty is silly in the context of modern America, because 75% of Jews in this country critique Israel. And beyond that, I will say, I'm going pretty far down the road by taking this seriously, because it was just reported 3 days ago, maybe it was last week, that former Mossad agents form private security firms that harass people who support BDS. And I can tell you from my
fake
own
stories
experience.
And harass.
Yeah, I can tell you from my own experience that in 2004, when Janine and I would critique Israel on the original Majority Report on Air America, the next day, we were contacted by the Israeli embassy. And we're basically told, we're going to send, I think it was Pincus at the time was the ambassador. We had the ambassador on a couple of times. So this type of stuff, and I said it yesterday and I will repeat it again, this is the greatest existential threat to Israel, in my opinion, because the days of pretending that Israel is not problematic and ignoring it and doing stuff like this is going to isolate Israel. It may take 5 or 10 years, but the tide has turned, and largely because of the actions of Israel. And I would say because of the right in this country. Because if you stifle debate in this way, you're doing a disservice to Israel. And I say this as someone who is a supporter of Israel. You're doing a disservice to Israel. You're basically saying like, you know what? They've had a lot to drink, but you just don't, just let them drive. Let them drive. That's basically what's happening.
I also can I broaden it a bit? Yeah. Everything is 100% on point, but I think that also, in addition to her courage on Israel, and also, by the way, this is ridiculous to have to do, but this is somebody who said it as an example that the Hajj should be boycotted because of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, which is an extraordinary position of a Muslim to hold. She's also been obviously opposed to a coup in Venezuela, and what she did to Elliot Abrams seriously pissed a lot of people off. And I think the real dangerous play here, and this is, I'll bring Barry Weiss up, not to bring her up, but Barry Weiss in that clip yesterday said she's on the Foreign Relations Committee. And Steve Scalise, David Duke, without the baggage, which I know we'll get to, is getting at this as well. So in addition to the disgusting, craven display of Democratic leadership to even consider throwing her under the bus like this, and also just the pure disingenuousness. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, is the only quarter that I would give on this is like, if somebody had a genuine concern about this, you could easily have this conversation with her privately, which frankly I think in general is a better thing to do with allies, period, across the board with regards to these things. But the real aim here is to get her off of the Foreign Relations Committee because she represents more broadly a courageous and different voice.
Right, yeah, and not just in regards to Israel.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I just said. Latin America, Saudi Arabia, across the board. I mean, she is somebody saying something different here. And then you add this to the context of the levels of incitement in this country, where simultaneously you're completely underplaying the fact that, as an example, there was a terrorist attack against Jews a couple of months ago by a deranged right-winger. And I don't even want to put out into the atmosphere, God knows the types of threats that Ilhan Omar is facing. And leaders in her party are not unequivocally condemning it and protecting her as both a political threat, maybe even a physical threat. And I have to say, like, I did this more last night, but I'll just do one sentence. Like, AOC is prevaricating, and there's no room for prevarication. She needs complete, utter, no BS protection. This is disgusting and dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. She needs to stand up for her colleague and comrade. Also, I'm sure all of the free speech warriors in the intellectual dark web are rushing to condemn this literal restriction on freedom of speech.
I might
right?
need to read more about that, but YouTube demonetization.
Listen to, specifically to get onto the point as to why they want Ilhan Omar off of the Foreign Services Committee. Here is a guy who literally introduced himself to a some type of Elks Club. I can't remember exactly what the context was when he was out running for election the first time, as David Duke without the baggage. Now, I suppose there's a good interpretation of that someone somewhere has the imagination to come up with. I, for one, can't. Maybe there was other things that David Duke was involved in. Was it like financial chicanery, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know, being on an all-meat diet.
Right. But here is Steve Scalise. This is the height of disingenuousness, but I don't, this I expect. This I expect. But the idea of Democrats echoing this unabashed racist line of thinking, and this idea that somehow, here he is accusing her of dual loyalties, right? And go ahead.
Well, the resolution only addresses a piece of the problem. She continues to display anti-Semitic remarks, comments. These are her beliefs. And so if they really are serious about addressing the problem, Nancy Pelosi has to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee. She's literally getting intelligence briefings on foreign policy of the United States, including our relationship with Israel, as she makes these kind of comments where she thinks any support of Israel is denouncing your own nationality. Where does that come from? It's a deep-rooted belief that shows the core of her convictions. And again, everybody's entitled to their own beliefs, but why would you have her on a committee that important, that sensitive to our foreign policy, if she has those kind of anti-Semitic beliefs, unless you're willing to tolerate it? And it shouldn't be tolerated. She ought to be removed immediately from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
The response by Nancy Pelosi to Steve Scalise is, "You've got to be joking." That's the only legitimate response to that guy. You've got to be joking. Because he's got to be joking.
Guy who runs on a overt white supremacy message is put, and again, this is incitement. And I don't throw those terms around. Like I've been, I'm someone who's critical, I think, of people on the left for going to that too quickly in a fair amount of cases, particularly online. But like that literally, if you couple that with the atmosphere and increase of hate crimes in this country, the West Virginia travesty with her and the 9/11 poster, this guy is, what's he implying by that? He's saying this is a Muslim woman who's getting intelligence briefings. The clear implication is some Frank Gaffney nut conspiracy that what is she passing intelligence to somebody?
Giving it to Al-Shabaab.
Of course.
That's what he's doing. He's inciting it right there.
And I think the idea of this is, of course, this is one of the ways that they hope to run, and this is one of the ways that they hope to sort of get the Democrats off message. And frankly, it's worked. And Nancy Pelosi should get a grip and, frankly, censure those members of her caucus who go out and smear a fellow member of the caucus.
Make a list.
Yeah, well, Democrats get money from AIPAC too, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like Bernie and AOC need to be brave in this instance, like they are in other ones, and they're kind of disappointing me right now.
Bernie's been better on this, frankly.
Let's
at least he hasn't sort of hemmed and hawed and prevaricated on Twitter.
All right, this is sort of fun. I want to just switch topics here and talk about this because Brad DeLong is a guy that I've been aware of, like online for an extended period of time, and I have various times he's had blogs that I've read to get his perspective on some of these things because it's interesting to know who is advising the Democratic establishment at any given time. And so he was a guy who was, I think, a deputy assistant secretary for the Treasury under the Clinton administration. He is a self-described neoliberal, Reubenite. He wrote a piece. I don't know where he posted this, but calls himself a Reuben Democrat. He, speaking of Robert Rubin, who was the Treasury Secretary under Clinton, and then also had a lot of influence under Obama as well. He wrote an op-ed the other day basically saying, we failed politically, and it is time for us to hand over the baton to the left of the Democratic Party. And let me just read some of this interview that he did with Zach Beauchamp and Vox. Beauchamp? Because it's interesting. But there's another point I want to make here, too, that it starts with the baton rightly passes to our colleagues on the left. We're still here, but it's not our time to lead. The core reason, DeLong argues, is political. He goes on to say, when asked what movement he identifies with, I would say it's largely neoliberal, market-oriented, and market regulation and tuning aimed at social democratic ends. Reuben Democrats believe you should prioritize economic growth. The idea being that we can look to the market to provide the material needs of, at the very least, those people who are in the worst positions economically in the country, right? So that's how we provide a safety net, and we raise all boats by a rising tide. And he goes on to say, we were 100% wrong on the politics, particularly in the context of the Obama administration. He says, Barack Obama rolls into office with Mitt Romney's healthcare policy, with John McCain's climate policy, with Bill Clinton's tax policy, and George H.W. Bush's foreign policy. He's all these things, not because the technocrats in his administration think they're the best policies possible, but because White House advisor David Axelrod and company say they poll well. And he says all of these with the idea that you could then collect a broad political coalition behind what is indeed Romney's healthcare policy, McCain's climate policy, H.W. Bush's foreign policy. And did George H.W. Bush and Mitt Romney, did John McCain say a single good word about anything Barack Obama ever did over the course of 8 solid years? No, they fucking did not, he says. No allegiance to the truth on anything other than the belief that John Boehner, Paul Ryan, and Mitch McConnell are the leaders of the Republican Party. And since they've decided on scorched earth, we back them to the hilt. This is a guy who learned the lesson. Sadly, not in real time, but better late than never.
He will not see the inside of a gulag.
Today, there's literally nobody on the right between those frantically accommodating Donald Trump on the one hand and us on the other, except for our brave friends in exile in the Cato Institute, now trying to build something. And then he goes...
he actually has a good line about that, though, later on. I don't know if it's in that same point.
Yes, well, it's similar. He goes on to say, like... he says, when you say, he's asked, when you say pass the baton to the left, does that mean give up on substantive policies? Meaning, meaning Reuben Democrats disagree with the left? And he goes, no, it means argue with them to the extent that their policies are going to be wrong and destructive, but also accept there is no political path to a coalition built from the Reuben center out. Instead, we accommodate ourselves to those to our left.
Bend the knee.
On some level, that's what he's saying. To the extent that they will not respond to our concerns, what they're proposing is a hell of a lot better than the poke in the eye with the sharp stick. That's either Trumpist proposals or the current status. In other words, he's saying you can have an argument with the left to try and fix their policy proposals, but at the end of the day, know that the worst case scenario in terms of capitulating to the left is far better than anything that is to the right of us. And he goes on to say that we need to reorient who our coalition is And we need to accept policies that we think are suboptimal because they are far more acceptable than anything we would get from the right. And he goes, until something non-rubblish is built in the Republican center, what might be good incremental policies just cannot be successfully implemented in America as we know it today. We need Medicare for all, funded by a carbon tax, with a whole bunch of UBI rebates for the poor and public investment in green technologies. That's the best policy given the political economic context. If the political economic context were different, well, I'm fundamentally a neoliberal shill. But he goes on to say, our current bunch of leftists, as far as are wonderful people, as far as leftists in the past are concerned. They're social democrats. They're very strong believers in democracy. They're very strong believers in fair distribution of wealth. He goes on, he can't help himself they could use a little more education about what's likely to work and what's not. But they're people who we're very, very lucky to have on our side. That's especially opposed to the people on the other side who are very, very strange indeed. You listen to never Trump conservatives like Tom Nichols or Bruce Bartlett or Bill Kristol or David Frum talk about all the people they had been in meetings with biting their tongues over the past 25 years. And your reaction can only be, why didn't you run away screaming into the night long ago?
That was right.
Because
that was where he slightly redeemed himself from the Cato
That is
Institute.
exactly what he's saying.
You know, I'll take as much neoliberal scolding as he wants to dish out as long as he's willing to bend the knee.
That's exactly right. And so this is, and be clear here, what he's saying is that our politics failed and we have no better options than I don't think he would say bend the knee, but he was saying we have no better options than capitulating to the left, even again, if their policies are suboptimal.
Yeah,
and
we'll see about that.
I would just add that Mike Consul from the Roosevelt Institute jumped in on this and said the failures of neoliberalism are bigger than its politics.
Right.
In other words, it's not just that there was a misunderstanding and misapprehension and miscomprehension of what partners they would find if they took steps to the right of the Rubin Democrat, the neoliberal perspective. It's not just that they failed to find partners there, because at the end of the day, John McCain was was in it to win it and didn't care about any policy. Mitt Romney, also not a good faith actor. Neither George Herbert Walker Bush or any of them. It's also because their policies failed. And Consul lays it out like this. He says there are two basic premises of the neoliberal policies. One is that these policies would create more growth so that, yes, inequality might increase, but so would wages. So economic growth first, redistribution and beefing up the safety net second. And he says the other premise of neoliberal policies was if we get government out of corporations' way, the market would become more dynamic and competitive and innovative. And he goes on to say that the first premise, that neoliberal policies would create more growth, and this in turn all boats would rise, was a total failure. The positive effects, he says, Consul says, of more inequality never happened. Starting in 1980, the growth rate of the economy slowed. While the economy grew at 3.9% from 1950 to 1980, since 1980, it's only grown at a rate of 2.6. And more problematic is the rate of increase of relative mobility. The rate at which people would rise up and down the economic ladder flattened compared to that same period, the Great Compression, as they call it. And he said, worse, absolute income mobility, whether you're better off than your parents, has also fallen. So the idea that neoliberalism would create more growth and that this growth would provide more opportunities, even if there was more inequality, every aspect of that fell apart. It didn't create more growth, and it certainly created far less opportunity.
And that was the core. I mean, when people like Peter Mandelson and New Labor said that we're intensely relaxed about the rich getting super rich, but it was always followed by, as long as everything's going up, as long as we're cutting poverty, as long as we're improving living standards, then the oligarchs can go to the top.
The second was that if you take the shackles off of business, they would innovate and grow out of social problems. So there was relaxation of antitrust enforcement because it would lead to more competition, right? We've talked about this. Talked about the Bork School of Antitrust taking over in the 80s. Unions would no longer get in the way of business. An unleashed financial sector would fund and lead the entire enterprise, right? All the innovation. Right. The idea of market power concentration was seen as a laughable concept stacked against the disciplining power of the markets themselves. Well, the story of the financial sector is quite obvious, but he also goes on to say there are two broader things that happen alongside it. First, at the level of individual firms, is that firm dynamism has fallen dramatically. The rate of business startups has fallen. In turn, this has shifted the age curve of businesses further out, with firms over 11 years accounting for 70% of the workers in 2000, but 75% of the workers in 2014. This is where jobs are created when new firms are created.
And I also just want to remind people that this kind of policy has not in practice been a truly free market policy. Like, they have made many laws and measures to sort of tinker with the market and prop it up, which is not generally what you associate with neoliberalism, but is a very important part.
Yes, but I think, the regulations that are in there are targeted. He's talking about the broad perspective of neoliberalism, which is basically get out of the way of antitrust being the biggest single roadblock to competition and dynamism in the markets, and none of that worked out. You had a decrease in the number of firms that are created, a decrease in the number of jobs that are created. You had less labor market mobility. The politics of neoliberalism have failed, but so too have the policies failed. And it's probably the case on some level that they're related, although that's probably another post at one point. But it's interesting to see when you have folks like Brad DeLong stepping up and basically saying, let's give up the ghost. There is real value to this. There is real value to this because it makes it that much harder, never mind for Howard Schultz, but it makes it that much harder for those on the right of the Democratic Party. What is Joe Biden going to say now? There was a story by Zach Carter about Joe Biden's being one of the Democratic architects of this new era of antitrust that has been so disastrous, fighting Ted Kennedy on this 30 years ago. But even for folks like Booker and Harris and Klobuchar and others, there's probably about
Gillibrand.
Hickenlooper.
Certainly Hickenlooper. But for these folks to lose the cover of intellectuals in that movement, at the very least in terms of the politics, is really problematic for them.
Well, and also even at a very, at a more base level, just the resentful, destructive Clinton apparatchiks still putting out the Clintons are just really concerned that Bernie can't beat, Trump, which is like, okay, guys, I don't know if that's the people we want to be listening to advice on how to beat Trump, but more broadly, this is the whole intellectual edifice of it, right? This is the stuff that's supposed to sustain all of the pettiness. These are the actual arguments that are evaporating.
To be fair from his perspective, or I should say to be fair, but to be clear-eyed about this, were I him, and I was worried about a Bernie candidacy, I would be telling Booker and Harris, you got to position yourself to as far left as you can get right now.
Oh, definitely. Of course.
Because he's not out there saying Bernie's the true.
Oh no. He's definitely not saying that. I'm not putting that onto him at all. I just think that particularly. Well, I mean, you're right. It's actually in some ways.
But this is the dynamic we want.
This
right?
is exactly the dynamic we
They're
want.
They're out there with pitchforks,
right?
So you guys better be doing something inside here to keep them
and
at
it
bay.
Vindicates the left argument, and then it gives another example for like the center of how they want to play it. And obviously, people like Kamala Harris have a bit more room. I think the thing with Biden is like, they're just, how could he possibly pivot? Because that Zarkarda piece is so good. I mean, there's the top lines that everybody knows, credit cards, Iraq, all of this stuff. But you go back to the 70s and it's like, wait, Joe Biden was fighting Ted Kennedy on behalf of Coca-Cola?
Right.
I mean, Jesus Christ.
Well, I'm going to do something a little uncharacteristic of me and defend neoliberalism for a second. Not now, but like in the 70s, maybe. You gonna drop a sound here?
Yeah, I can't find that. Hey, what happened? All right, go ahead.
Hey, what happened? So clearly, I guess there's like a few distinctions I want to make, because I think neoliberalism is a word that gets thrown around a lot because it has several different meanings, right? There's the policy, like you've been talking about. There's the accompanying ideology that sort of supports and justifies the policy. And then there's just as a periodization within capitalist development. So in the 70s, we know things got all messed up. We were having oil shocks. We were having a debt crisis. We were having stagflation, which was a thing that wasn't even supposed to be able to happen, but it did. Everything was crazy. And, the people in charge of policy and the economy were like, okay, we need to get rid of Keynesian economics. We need a new kind of policy that's going to like get everything stabilized so that, capitalist development can continue and the world won't be thrown into a recession because, these folks, they didn't want they thought the alternative would be worse, right? The alternative would be global recession or even like revolution, just like anything to resolve this crisis. So they came up with these policies and, in some ways it did stabilize the economy. But I think it's run its course now, and it was foolish for any of them to think that we had reached the end of history in the 90s and all that we had to do now was like, some kind of technocratic tinkering around the edges, in which case being a centrist would make sense. So I guess in that sense, it wasn't the result of like bad people having bad morals and making bad choices from that. It was like, it was very much overdetermined by what capitalist development was doing at the time. And I think now the question is, can we set the clock back to the Keynesian era? Is that possible? Or do we need to change the relations of production in some essential way so that we don't keep having these kinds of crises?
Okay, this is like one of those movies where you get struck by electricity and then we switch bodies. Because I'm going to say I do not think those ideas came from such a benign place. They came 30 years earlier in the wake of World War II at Mount Pelerin, when guys like Mises and Hayek got together, and they were basically saying they were worried about sovereignty of nations, overriding corporations, and they wanted to make sure that governments functioned on behalf of business. And so
there were always those folks with those ideas. Don't get me wrong.
They are the ones who launched these ideas. They are the ones who specifically developed them and then basically sent people out in the world to go and promulgate them.
But why were they able to take power? Why were they able to execute them at that exact point in time?
In the
70s.
Well, I mean, I think that they were building on it, but I think yes, there was the opportunity arose, but they had been building infrastructure, and had been going and had been sort of building an intellectual movement around these ideas of laissez-faire markets, supposedly, and so yes, there was a weakness in the system that allowed this stuff to take over. But I think it was definitely, it was fundamentally anti-democratic. And
oh yeah, I'm not saying it was democratic.
I think it was.
I mean, it's a dialectic, right? To use a word that I probably overuse. There had to be people with ideas and policies, and there also had to be a breaking point, a crisis in the market and in capitalist development.
That's the way all of this stuff works. That's how that's how religions get started. There's just people wandering out there, and then one day that's how Donald Trump becomes president, in my estimation, right? Like things line up in such a way, and there happens to be sort of a weakness, and the stars align, and then everything goes to crap. Yeah. Well,
I think we kind of agree with each other on some level, but well, it'll be interesting to see, what the next periodization is within capitalist development, because, I support reforms, obviously. Without being a reformist, I think people need reforms. People need healthcare and jobs and food and whatnot. But it'll be interesting to see if at the current point in capitalist development that we're at, which is very different than the post-World War II era, if those kinds of economics are going to work the same way, or if, maybe we'll have another crisis and it'll help us make the case once again that we can't really reform this mode of production, this system. We need to keep going forward.
And with that, we will switch back into our regular scheduled bodies and go into the fun half of the program, wherein you can call us 646-257-3920. We will take your calls. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member today by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. And when you do, you support the free show, and then we give you extra content every day, and we give it to you all commercial free. Except for justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Because they're a movement. They're movement supporters. And they're a great company. So check it out, jointhemajorityreport.com. Today is Wednesday. That means last night was Tuesday. That means Michael showed up for work and did the Michael Brooks show.
Sort of a courtesy to show up to work on TMPS Day, I feel. Ben Burgess joined us. We talked about logic for the left. We did a clinic on deconstructing basically right-wing arguments and what actual logic is. David Hume and the distinction between is and ought. It was fascinating stuff. And then commentary connecting the Bernie Sanders launch with Lula's temporary release to go to his grandson's funeral, and these two social democratic icons, one a front runner, the other a political prisoner. And then we stood with Ilhan Omar and had a very
save some
packed,
for the show, will you?
Dude, this is like less than a fourth of it. A packed post game. Patreon.com/TMBS. Get the whole thing this Sunday, an illicit history of Caribbean debt. And also tickets to the LA Live show at the homepage with Ana Kasparian, Big Waz, and Nando Vila.
Jamie, do you want to do your show now, too?
And then in the 30-minute block.
Hello and welcome to the Antifada, where unrest is best. So, yes, this week on the Antifada, are you a nerd like us? Do you read stories about robots in space while also pondering a socialist future? Well, do we have an interview for you? Fellow science fiction fanatic Will Menaker of Chapo Trap House joins Sean and Jamie, that's me, for an extended discussion with one of our favorite utopian futurists, Kim Stanley Robinson. Holy shit. Come for the revolutionary potentialities of the post-capitalist imaginary and stay for the psychedelic polyamory.
And Matt's not here, but check out Literary Hangover. Do you want to do a pitch, Brendan?
I think is it still Wakefield with Nathaniel Hawthorne and Henry James on Hawthorne as well? Some of these sources include Dan McCall on Henry James's Hawthorne in the New England Review from 1997, and Henry James's Hawthorne by Matthew Peters from the Cambridge Quarterly in 2013, a little more recent.
Jesus.
It's an early, and it's
All right.
about polyamory.
Quick break. Fun half. See you there.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em.
Almost says what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
All right. We are back. It is the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Number 646-257-3920 is the number. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a... Oh, hold on one second. I got to get in there, too. Hold on one second, caller. There I am. Got to push that caller back out and then get back on. Hold on one second. Bear with us, caller. Sorry about that. I got to go in first. Calling from a 301 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, guys. This is Russ. I'm calling from the Rockville, Maryland area.
Russ from the Rockville, Maryland area. What's on your mind, Russ?
So I emailed you guys yesterday, so I really appreciate you letting me get on the line here. This is incredible. Thank you so much, guys.
Great. Thanks for calling.
So I've got a question. Yeah, I'm right-leaning guy. I'm not definitely far more right than you guys, but not nearly as right as a lot of others. And I guess the big question I have today is, what is the expectation of the more progressive community for the religious community? And I mean specifically, I saw the piece you guys had a while back about think it was Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, and Ben Shapiro was cordial and he's friendly, but he drew the line at baking the cake, right, or the cupcake, or going to an anniversary party, and I guess that still wasn't good enough, right? It was still kind of like, wow, he's still a homophobe, and and that was hard for me because I don't understand what the expectations are, right? Like, if the religious community is willing to be, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I mean, look, I'm perfectly okay. Look, if it's your belief that there's something problematic with gay people, then you're homophobic. I think it's perfectly within your right to be homophobic if that's what your religion tells you to do, but that's what it is, right? And that's fine. By fine, I mean like live and let live. The problem is when you engage in commerce in the secular world, I don't think that you should be able to discriminate in that instance based on those religious bigoted values. Now, I think it's okay if your religion calls for you to be a bigot, then that's your religion and that's your business. I practice religion. I don't practice the fundamentalist version of it. But I practice religion. I have nothing against religion per se. But if anything causes you to do something that I think is bigoted, then, it's the bigoted part of the problem that is the problem. But so that's my expectation, that if you have these precepts that we don't live in a religious society, we live in a secular society. That's what our some people want to call it a civic religion, fine, but that's what it is.
Well, so the commerce piece, I think that's a totally different argument, right? Like the Masterpiece Cake Shop, that's a totally different word of argument. I'm talking about just general getting along with people, and I think even using that language and that's why I'm calling it. I think that's a little harsh to call a religious person who is not comfortable going to a wedding of the same sex, right? Like that's the only line they have. Everything else, have them over for dinner, go out to dinner, be there for them if they're sick, but they just can't cross that line.
Okay, they're a little bit bigoted. I mean, honestly, it's like it's homophobia, almost like definitionally. Like why? Like what? Why? Like, I mean, explain to me the rationale. I'm sorry.
Because they're being called to believe a higher power, right? Like whether we agree or not, right? Whether we take that Bible at the word or not, some people do.
Right.
And I just think with the more liberal mindset, I just think the left should be a little bit more tolerant of that because...
Well, I'm not going to pass a law that says that you, or not necessarily you, I don't know, what your stance is on this, but I'm saying that a person is mandated to attend the wedding of a gay couple. I'm not passing a law that does that. It's just my opinion. That religious person's opinion can be that some higher power has told them that gay people getting married is icky or wrong or evil. And for me, just, my higher rationale tells me that is homophobia, almost like definitionally, right? Like, and I'm sorry if my opinion of that person's opinion is, upsets them, but, grow up. You got God on your side. Who cares what Sam Seder says?
Yeah, you can be as homophobic as you want, but you can't codify that into law.
Right. And by saying you can be as homophobic as you want, that doesn't give you I don't have a mandate to, accept that you are without having an opinion on it. That's silly. I mean, I know that religious people look upon, fundamentalist religious people look upon me as profane. I don't walk around going like, how dare you think of me as
profane. I
profane.
find that a little offensive, frankly. But
no, but I mean honestly.
No, I mean I'm being honest.
Well,
I do.
I mean,
I'm
but
trying to understand
okay,
his sentiment.
that
Like
can
I
be,
get it.
That can be
but
offensive.
It goes both ways.
But
it
that
goes
can be
both ways.
Right. That can be offensive.
I just want to say, in specific regards to that video, like I am very much of the belief that every type of abhorrent, belief or whatever, I on some level really don't care as long as it doesn't have to do with how you behave politically or civically. But what that video was also about was the innate contradiction in a crew of people constantly patting themselves on the back for how supposedly open they are, and then one who's supposed to be like a colleague and friend of another literally looking at him in the face and essentially saying, on some level, you're a second-class person to me because of your sexuality.
Right.
And him, Dave Rubin, who's a dunce, actually having a moment where it registered like, oh, this isn't all just whining about YouTube videos. This is a guy that I'm supposedly friends with who's literally telling me that he thinks that there's something wrong with me because of who I am. It was actually, there was a lot of pathos to it.
So
and
much
also,
for the tolerant right.
And also, like, yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, it is what it is. I mean, I interact, like, of course it's homophobia on some level. It doesn't mean we have a mandate about it.
Well,
but,
Dave
like,
Rubin made his choice. He would rather be a rich guy who doesn't have to pay taxes than have the people he hangs around recognize his basic humanity.
Does that
yeah, I mean, I guess where I'm coming from is, like, I'm Jewish and my brother's Orthodox, right?
Right.
I could not participate in my brother's wedding, right? Because I'm not Shomer Mitzvah, right? I don't guard the mitzvah, and the only people who could say the blessings on the bima with him were people who were observant as him. For a while, it pissed me off, but then I was like, you know what? He doesn't. That's just what he believes, right? I mean, he's completely open, right? I mean, we have a great relationship, but I couldn't participate. Nobody in my family could participate in his wedding because we weren't religious. His in-laws participated in the wedding. He doesn't have animosity towards me. He just has a limitation to what he can do, what he can accept in his practice. And I guess, I wish some people from the left would accept that from people on the right.
Listen, I'm glad that you can accept that with your brother. I don't know that it would really particularly bother me or not. And like I say, it's just opinion at that point if it doesn't interfere with civic life. I mean, that's it.
I don't really have a.
Let me in the middle, that's the expectation that everybody's. I mean, how did your mom feel?
I mean, yeah, it bothered her.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So now you accept the fact that it bothers your mom, right? I mean, so different people react differently. Well, yeah, because it's like it's her son. What you gonna do? Excommunicate him? Maybe. I mean, certainly some religious people excommunicate their children who are gay. They certainly do that. I mean, look, the other problem is that it ends up leading a basis for some scenarios that lead to violence. I mean, look, if there were not religious fundamentalists saying that gay people are sinners, you would probably have a lot less killing of gay people and killing of transgender people, right? I mean, there is a problem with the fundamentalism. It's not so bad when your Orthodox brother says, "Well, my brother who's Reform is treif." That you don't hear a lot of. Now, it may be a problem. Let's say if the fundamentalists, here's a scenario that I think as a Jew you probably have some sensitivity to. But if the fundamentalists get a hold of the law, and they have to a certain extent in Israel, the whole concept of Israel, where Jews have a place to go in the event that there's another Shoah, that's out the window because you're not considered one.
You tell your brother to stop being such a schmuckle.
I mean, so there is a scenario where maybe down the road that could end up, violence could be implicated. But the reality is that people have been beaten to death because they're gay. People are beaten to death once a month because they're transgender in this country. I think that if there was not a religious edict that these people are fundamentally sinful, we probably would see at the very least less of that violence. So, I'm not going to mandate that your brother allow you to be part of his wedding. And if you guys can reconcile that, God bless, as it were. But
can you be cordial with a religious person then who believes this? Like, could you be cordial, and could you, while you disagree with them, what is your personal feelings on a fundamentally religious person?
Well, I'm not going to beat up
Islam.
I'm not going to beat up a fundamentalist who thinks that gay people are sinful. I mean,
Sam can barely be cordial to his friends, dude.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not gonna beat up someone like that.
Well, here's the thing about religious coalitions or political coalitions. You don't have to like each other to be in a coalition together. Right.
I feel like what you're asking, I just want to maybe cut through this a little bit, because I feel like everything that you're asking, can you be nice to people who have these beliefs? Can you work with people who have these beliefs? Are you trying to eliminate people's ability to have these beliefs? And the answer to that is all categorically no. But if what you're asking, yes, not no, yes, you can. But if what you're specifically asking is, should there be a specific exemption of something being accurately, objectively described because it has a religious basis in any religion, then no. Like Ben Shapiro's being homophobic there, and he has a total right to be homophobic, and it's not, I'm not concerned. I mean, in his case, because he has a huge platform, it's different, but like, I'm not particularly concerned with his personal beliefs as long as it didn't translate to his behaviors at all. But that specific act, whether that basis is I just think it's icky and I have no religious belief, that's homophobic, or if you're religious, it's homophobic, and that is what it is.
Yeah, we don't have to be friends to be in a coalition with one another, right?
I'm not even saying...
I would only add that the way religion manifests in different people and different beliefs is, it's not just a binary, right? It's not like either you are Catholic and you sign on to this rigid set of beliefs, or you're not and you don't believe any of them, right? It's heavily dependent on your interpretation, who you are psychologically, like so many other social and psychological factors that I don't want to blame religion entirely for the bad things that people do in the name of religion, because there are plenty of Catholics who don't hate gay people, and there are plenty of, practicing Jews who, I mean, there are basically as many kinds of Judaism as there are Jews. Let's be real. If you've ever gone to Passover, you know that. Religion. Yeah, we can't blame the scripture entirely for the behaviors of the people. It's still on you, Is
that good,
Can I ask
Russ?
one more question, or have I cheated my time?
What is it?
About general feeling on Israel, as I know that there's been a lot of talk about criticizing Israel. I'm all for criticizing certain things with Israel, but I guess two questions is, what, you guys are king for a day, what is the perfect outcome in that region? Does Israel still exist? And how do we deal with Hezbollah and Hamas, who are they're just not good groups of people, right? They don't treat their people well. So those are my two
Hezbollah
questions.
and Hamas, actually, I mean, there's a reason why at various times they've had support, but that's, let's not get into that right now. I mean, I think like we've talked about it a decent amount, and
democracy and full autonomy for all. And by the way, if you had a binational democracy that really ensured security and protection of all people in that region, Hamas and Likud would both totally evaporate in terms of their vote shares. In other words, if every Arab had democratic rights in that area, Likud would totally fail. And if you had to secure enough Jewish votes to win a coalition government, Hamas wouldn't perform particularly well. Right. So that's the best path forward for everybody.
Look, the two-state solution is dead at this point in time. I don't think anyone here thinks it's actually going to happen.
If I had the ability to just step in and orchestrate it, but I think that there is a mechanism that would be a good resolution. But I agree with you. I don't. It's like that ship has passed.
Like, you cannot have a Jewish state that is also a democracy, right? As long as Palestinians are second-class citizens within that landmass, it's not truly going to be a democracy. So you need to give everybody full rights. I mean, my long-term solution is, guess what? The no state solution, because I am a communist and I believe in a global communist government with no states, no borders. But, I'm going to be accused of being impractical here, so I'll stop there.
I appreciate the call, Russ.
No, this is good, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care.
Bye.
Shalom.
Calling from
to give me an emergency hang-up button. It's brilliant.
Calling from a 425 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Heather in North Carolina.
Hello, Heather. What's on your mind?
So I was listening to a Radiolab episode recently. They released it in November around the midterm elections, talking about ranked choice voting and allowing 16-year-olds to vote. So I just wanted to know your guys' opinions on these things and how effective they could be in America if we were able to actually achieve that at all. I know that for 16-year-olds, they turned that down in D.C., and for ranked choice voting, it's only been effective in Maine in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I got to think about the 16-year-old thing. There may be something to that. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that the savvy of a 16-year-old is not equivalent to what an 18-year-old was 40 years ago in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of ranked choice, I think that's good. For the most part, I mean, there are times it can go sideways, but that's the case with everything. So I'm for ranked choice voting, sure. I think that would be good. And I would also like matching grants on matching funds for campaigns. In fact, that was one of the parts of the bill, the HR 1 bill. But
I'd support both. I think if any, I mean, looking at I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the student activists with the gun issue, but I mean, I think that there's just so many ample cases of young people who clearly have the savvy and the capacity to engage. They should certainly be allowed to vote.
Appreciate the call.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Bye. All right, let's get to some clips here. That guy. Oy.
Oy.
I was just looking at what's his face. Well, this is really nice. You have Rand Paul. Here he is at the vaccines and public health hearing in the Senate, and this is highly problematic. As you know, measles was wiped out in this country some 30 years ago and has returned. And there's particular concerns that it is going to return with a vengeance when we get into spring, which is apparently the season where it has its most ability to spread. There's some theory out there that, after a certain period of time, people forget. There's an institutional or, sort of a generational forgetting of just how horrific measles can be. And here is Rand Paul doing his best to justify the spread of measles.
That parents who refuse to vaccinate their children risk spreading these diseases to the immunocompromised community. There doesn't seem to be enough evidence of this happening to be recorded as a statistic, but it could happen. But if the fear of this is valid, are we to find that next we'll be mandating flu vaccines? Between 12 and 56,000 people die from the flu, or are said to die from the flu in America, and there's estimated to be a few hundred from measles. So I would guess that those who want to mandate measles will be after us on the flu next. Yet the current science only allows for educated guessing when it comes to the flu vaccine. Each year, before that year's flu vaccine or strain is known, the scientists put their best guess into that year's vaccine. Some years it's completely wrong. We vaccinate for the wrong strain of flu vaccine. Yet 5 states already mandate flu vaccines. Is it really appropriate to mandate a vaccine that more often than not vaccinates for the wrong flu strain? As we contemplate forcing parents to choose this or that vaccine, I think it's important to remember that force is not consistent with the American story.
All right, pause it for 1 second. All right, so first off, he starts off in his opening statements here sort of conflating 3 or 4 different principles why we shouldn't have mandatory vaccinations. He conflates the fact that the measles vaccination has a success rate that is far superior, particularly year to year. I don't know what it is, well into the 90s, versus the flu vaccine. He's right. Every year, scientists do not know. They just predict what flu strains are going to be out there. And some years, the flu vaccination is like 50-50, which is still pretty good. Some years it's 70% effective. But the measles vaccination is not.
97%.
97%. But he's conflating these things as if it's a principle, as opposed to a simple assessment that he, as a doctor, should be aware is made every single day in a doctor's office. Right? Like the potential for you to get a certain type of cancer is a function of how much it's been present in your parents, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, I, as a doctor, would be more willing to prescribe you getting subject to radiation to assess whether or not you have cancer than if you have no reason for me to believe that you have an elevated risk for cancer. And so I won't subject you to radiation because it doesn't make sense because I'm weighing that out. That's the concept that's at work with vaccinations. And then it becomes a policy because that's the only way that vaccinations work. But let's hear him get to the nub of it. This is where he really needs to deliver this so that his dad's email business thrives.
Important to remember that force is not consistent with the American story, nor is force consistent with the liberty our forefathers sought when they came to America. I don't think you have to have one or the other, though. I'm not here to say don't vaccinate your kids. If this hearing is for persuasion, I'm all for the persuasion. I vaccinated myself. I vaccinated my kids. For myself and my children, I believe that the benefits of vaccines greatly outweigh the risks, but I still do not favor giving up on liberty for a false sense of security. Thank you.
Now, the fact of the matter is that we have multiple examples of our forefathers engaging in mandatory force for health, right? Do you have those examples right there? Oh, they're on the sound sheet? Okay. Yeah. Quarantine legislation, which until 1796 was the responsibility of states, was implemented in port cities threatened by yellow fever from the West Indies. Oh, well, maybe we can just convince people.
What about liberty? Not
to go around with West Indies. This is back in the 1790s. Maybe that's not our forefathers weren't doing that. Of course, they were doing it in the States because there's public policy measures that actually prevent people from getting sick. They didn't need convincing with the yellow fever. They just said, this is the way we're going to contain yellow fever. We're going to quarantine people. And that gives you even less liberty, definitionally, right? You're going to quarantine people who come back with Ebola? I mean, this is just absurd. It is such posturing and it's so stupid the way that he does this. It's literally all about an email business that his dad has that he hopes to inherit.
First the Senate, then Dad's emails.
I
tried to run for president.
Even my anarcho-communist utopia will have vaccine requirements, and hopefully people will believe in less nonsense, but we'll see.
In my anarcho-utopia, you sell a newsletter with secret investor advice on gold bars that will also get rid of liver cancer. So to each their own.
Now, with that said, let's turn our attention to how hypocritical AOC is. Apparently, she has not, because in her democratic socialist utopia, where she imagines everyone getting health care without having to go bankrupt for it, without having to have an accounting degree, or the idea that there would be an opportunity for free college, or the idea that we would protect the planet. She's not only coming from your cows, folks, but she's actually taking airplanes. Here's Fox.
That's right. AOC was at the airport.
Flying
even though she's talking about we need to take high-speed rail, she was taking the Delta shuttle, it looks
to
like.
New York. Last time I checked, there's a pretty robust line
Well,
between
and the reporter
DC and New
said
York
that.
on the
Why
train.
are you taking a plane and not taking the train? And she said, because that would be wasting my constituents' time.
So,
so
anyway,
now she's a capitalist with her own time.
Man, this is even more controversial than Bernie Sanders wears a winter coat.
AOC
Right.
is
These guys
a
are
time
really
hoarder.
onto something. She's trying to hoard a time surplus so she can profit from time.
You call yourself a socialist,
You
and
know
yet
what?
you hoard time.
I love
Riddle
how
me that.
They just they build a fake like a demented premise, right? Like the Green New Deal is going to get rid of air travel. And it's like, okay, that's not true, but obviously that doesn't matter. We'll be running all programming with that. Just, it's like a lie, but also like a paranoid fantasy fever dream. And then the next step is like, well, you're a total hypocrite for not observing the ban that we made up that you support in our heads that you support.
What's also
these people think that she should walk everywhere.
What's also
like one of them
astonishing.
actually
Well, that was
said
the
that.
Tucker Carlson Adam Green segment.
Right. And what's also astonishing is that the Fox and Friends, who expect her to take a high-speed rail, would never support high-speed rail. It really is like an Escher painting, one of those graphics, right, where they just keep it keeps flipping over on itself. But there it is.
Well, at least they're not hypocrites,
But
though.
here
they make
is-
sure to take chauffeured Suburbans everywhere so they can have maximum waste at all times.
Speaking of Tucker Carlson and his obsession with AOC, he apparently
thirsty.
is he's been on a bad streak as of late.
I'm in a bad mood. And I'm thirsty.
Tucker Carlson. He was embarrassed because that Dutch historian Bregman embarrassed him. Then friend of show Adam Green embarrassed him on TV, and so he's looking for a safe harbor, and of course he looks towards the dayside programming at Fox. Here is Tucker Carlson with Melissa Francis, the outnumbered co-host.
But Tucker, I mean, you made the point before. Think about what socialism is. Like, the very definition is a government takeover of the means of production. It's a power grab.
Yes.
That's what she's been all about, is a power grab. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. We go to Washington, we decide, we get the means of production, we get control, and we tell you all what you get. It's all has the same theme if you boil it down to its most basic sense. So she doesn't want other people using planes, but she'll use a plane going back and forth between DC and New York because she's important. It means she's the ruling class. She's powerful.
Exactly.
She's important. So she gets to do these things. But for you and me, we're just, the serfs along the way. So we shouldn't, have a carbon footprint. We shouldn't do all these other things. And I think that
These billionaires are the serfs.
She won't even return my calls.
The Delta Shuttle. The Delta Shuttle, of course, is the ruling elites.
The Delta Shuttle between DC and
New
LaGuardia
York right.
It is like, that's definitely Emirati air right there.
Yeah, usually the serfs ride private jets more than their ruling class.
Right.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
That is the
That's what I've been
code
saying.
of the serf.
You want me to campaign for a neoliberal shill? Well, gas up the jet, you son of a bitch.
I think, but also, let's be pedantic for a second. That is not the definition of socialism.
Yeah, no.
Taking over the means of production.
That is a highly contested term.
It's just straight on power grab.
Yeah.
It's close to one definition of socialism, but it's not the government. It's not a top-down thing, right? It's the workers who could take over. Yeah, they democratize it. The people who make the stuff should decide what happens to the stuff and the conditions of their own labor. And insofar as the government is doing this, it's the government as the elected representatives of the people from the bottom up.
Power grab. She wants to be the only one to take the Delta shuttle.
I want complete space.
It's not going to be Delta shuttle anymore. It's going to be AOC shuttle.
AOC 1.
She's just going to be living like a dictator. Well, Tucker Carlson has to like fan her and feed her grapes.
I'm doing work in the countryside all of a sudden.
So Michael Bloomberg has announced that he will not be running in the Democratic primary for president, and it brought about this headline, which I thought was the funniest thing that we're going to see for weeks. Here it is. I'll read it now. Howard Schultz hopes to benefit from Michael Bloomberg's decision not to run for president. I bet he does. Apparently,
it'd be like the knight in that Monty Python movie. I'm still here.
Well,
I still have money to
that's
waste.
what's so funny about this, is that
I'm not dead yet.
You know, this. I mean, people have heard the concept of motivated reasoning, right? Well, you know that there were at least two guys who were sitting around, Bill Burton and Steve Schmidt, going like, if this is how we spin it, if Bloomberg doesn't run, it's good for him.
We could string this dope for another 3 or 4 months.
Well,
that's more money.
Speaking
of private jet
that
flights.
is not speculation. That is how they're getting paid.
No, seriously.
If he stays into the election, they are looking at FU money, the walk away kind of money, which they need now.
I don't support confiscatory tax policy because if my scam to you grift off of this delusional moron goes through, I'll be in a whole different tax bracket, which is where I really object to AOC's 70% plan.
All right, and then let's talk about this too, because this was interesting. There's been a lot of back and forth online at the moment about MMT. This is the modern monetary theory, which argues that the government does not need to tax for the sake of spending. Specifically, the U.S. government, I think they would carry this theory out to other countries that have sovereignty over their own currency to some degree. But in the context of the United States, that their argument is that there's a role for taxes, but it isn't to allow the government to spend. That spending happens first, taxation happens second. And here is Larry Summers, and this is interesting. He's on CNBC, arguing that MMT theory is just bunk and dangerous.
Yes, fiscal policy is a very important tool, and whenever the next recession comes, we're going to need a lot of fiscal stimulus. But this modern monetary theory idea where we can guarantee jobs for everybody or have Medicare for all and just rely on money printing to finance it, I think that's quite a dangerous approach, and I'm sorry to see that it's gaining more adherence. What my column points out is that it's sort of the new voodoo economics, that there was a valid idea 40 years ago that taxes had incentive effects, which got transmuted into the invalid idea that you could cut taxes in order to raise revenue. The Laffer curve, supply side economics, all of that turned out to be very costly, and it had to be reversed when the United States tried it. And I think something very similar is true with respect to modern monetary theory.
Well, first off, I don't think it's been reversed. that it has had quite a bit of durability, that idea, based upon the last set of tax cuts we just got. What I think the value of modern monetary theory is that Larry Summers is afraid that it's going to bring about these social benefits, and that worst case scenario, I guess they'll have to figure out a way of paying for it. But here's Stephanie Kelton, one of the adherents to MMT, where she says, Larry says it's dangerous to say that the government can just print the money. Was it dangerous when Alan Greenspan said it in August of 2011, when Warren Buffett said it, when Joe Stiglitz said it, or when Larry Summers apparently said it? She goes on to say, no one is saying that because the U.S. can print the money that we can spend on Medicare for All, job guarantee, Green New Deal without ever raising taxes. That's not MMT. I don't know where you got that impression, but it's not MMT. We are simply noting that the federal government is not revenue constrained, and that the way we currently approach the federal budgeting process is restricting our potential. In other words, she's saying taxes in the context of MMT play an economic role insofar as the intention is to limit possible inflation. If the economy gets overheated, you take some money off the board, essentially, by taxing. A significant number of MMTers also support confiscatory taxing, to deal with things like inequality. But that's more of a political decision, I think, rather than an economic one. Although I think you could probably argue that from an economic perspective, it makes it more efficient. There's been a lot of attacks on MMT. I am not necessarily a strict adherent, although I've yet to see a critique that I think is that tackles it head on. Doug Henwood had one in Jacobin, and I was a little disappointed in it, frankly, because most of it was about the intellectual history of the theory and the pedigree of the people who support it, and not a terribly robust analysis of it from an economic perspective. I don't pretend to understand monetary theory that well, but I can sort of read and understand when someone is addressing a specific theory. And I just didn't see it happen there. And I was a little disappointed, frankly, because I'm curious about that. I mean, I think
you should have him on
to talk about it. I mean, frankly, I was just assessing the piece, and I don't feel like I know enough about monetary policy to refute assertions, but I just...
Or just ask him whatever questions you had reading the article or whatever you thought was missing.
Well, they were assertions, and there was no evidence behind that as far as I could tell. And 3/4 of the piece, are literally about the people who proposed this stuff. And so... But maybe.
I actually emailed Doug to ask him his take on this particular thing. Would you like to hear his response?
Sure.
Okay. Quote, "They pull this con all the damn time. Free money. Well, not really. Where did you ever get the idea that we promised free money? The government doesn't need to tax or borrow to spend, but it does by law. The Treasury can't just create money out of thin air and buy shit, and it's not allowed to sell bonds directly to the Fed. Both are illegal. What is all this melodrama with the debt ceiling about if there were no such restrictions? The Treasury balances its books every day. Money comes in from taxes and borrowing. Money goes out in spending. If income is greater than outgo, the Treasury's checking account at the Fed rises. If income is less than outgo, it falls, kind of like everyone else, but with a lot more zeros. So the question is, how much can the Treasury borrow? Is it a good idea to be running deficits this large when the economy is at relatively full employment? What do you do in a recession? Borrow $1.5 trillion a year? From whom? Is it wise to assume you can keep borrowing these huge amounts forever? What are the constraints? Are there ever constraints? Do we have enough spare capacity to start buying high-speed trains and solar panels with funny money? It's weird to be turning to Alan Greenspan as an authority. Greenspan is the guy who said in
wait,
2005,
wait,
it's almost
stop
done.
for a second. No, because I want to just address it as it goes, because I don't care about the Greenspan thing. He concedes in his piece that QE2 was sort of actually like that. That all the quantitative easing that we had was sort of like that. And it is also the case that, we have now statutorily gotten rid of the debt ceiling, and people suggest that we can do that as well. That we borrow, and all we're doing is allowing Congress to appropriate. So we do borrow like that. We do print money and give it to the banks. We did that multiple times, and everybody said the exact same thing that he was saying, except for at that time it was Glenn Beck and Bush and Chains saying we're going to have runaway Weimar inflation.
Well, I think he says that you can do that temporarily to get out of a recession, but it's not a good long-term plan. And I'll admit that I don't totally understand it either. I am really just starting to wrap my head around Marxist economics, and I think it's a bad idea to learn two different languages at once. But it doesn't really make sense in terms of what I know about economics either. But at the end of the day, I'm actually kind of agnostic about it, because if it helps us get progressive legislation passed, how do we pay for it? Don't worry about it. Then great. And if it turns out that the MMT people are right and the Marxist economists are wrong, and we can just have a great social welfare state funded by printing money, that's great. If we can't, if it causes an inflation crisis, that is, my job is the same, because it doesn't change the basic relations of production, right?
Well, I think that is really at the heart of his critique, but I feel like that ball was hidden a little bit, because it doesn't. It addresses some material needs theoretically, and assuming that you can control inflation, and that it's that there isn't an overheated demand.
My job is the same whether or not MMT turns out to work, right? Because I think some people view it as a way around not just changing the relations of production, but even taxing the wealthy or doing anything politically difficult. But whether or not this theory turns out to work, even leftists who buy into MMT, we all believe that it's not a replacement for
I agree with
social
that.
revolution.
I would say, I just would add two quick things to this. One, and we talked about this morning, and I think the basic, solid critique of MMT is that it couldn't be applied in that many circumstances outside the United States. So it's not a global systems theory, which I definitely have a problem with, or not even necessarily a problem with. It's just descriptive. It wouldn't help Greece get out of its crisis.
Yeah,
it wouldn't help certainly giving economic sovereignty to the Caribbean as an example.
And we can't have social democracy in one country.
The only thing the other thing too, and I want to reread it, because I skimmed it quickly, and I definitely I don't read and listen to everything Doug Henwood does, but everything I have, I usually learn a lot from.
Me too.
And it seemed a little bit more polemic than analysis, which is why I want to give it another read. And I think, but what I don't like is I really don't like when Marxists accept neoliberal argumentation about the economy as a starting point. So sometimes I see I remember one time I was at a party, and it was this funny argument spilled out, and I'll summarize it as it was two European guys, one's a financial reporter and one's a Greek communist. And I'm the one in the middle talking about how Greek could be relieved through various forms of, the Eurozone not implementing austerity on them. And the financial reporter is no, it's great because, Greece's banks are getting recapitalized. And the communist guy is going, they need to have austerity because, the market dictates it. And the only option is full revolution.
Was his name Pavlos Rufos?
It was not. And I'm just wondering, in somewhere in the middle, it's well, I wouldn't accept pure revolution or bust. And I think the reality is in relative politics, MMT is doing a lot of work, as you said in the beginning, of being
how about you calm down with all of your deficit hysteria and we take care of the Green New Deal and healthcare, which
Right.
is quantitative easing for normal people, which is what Mark Blythe calls it, and that has a huge amount of utility, regardless of the bigger critiques, including the global ones, which I definitely hold.
Well, we did an episode of the Intifada specifically on the Greek debt crisis, and I encourage everyone to listen to it who wants to understand this stuff more. I learned a lot from doing the episode and interviewing this guy. Like a lot of it is very much overdetermined by what the capitalist market is doing. And you can say like, oh, the Syriza should have stood up to the World Bank, yada, yada, but like they didn't. And we're looking for like a world systems explanation why it happened the way it did.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 419 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Hi, this is Lucas from Columbus.
Lucas from Columbus. What's on your mind, Lucas?
I just had I had two questions. One was more primarily towards Jamie, just a personal opinion. I wanted to know, as someone who holds like a more anarchist-leaning perspective, on how you feel about the use of the hammer and sickle in leftist symbolism.
Oh, well, I think it's often a little ironic when people use it like that these days. But like, yeah, like I don't want to go to the gulag for being too much of an anarchist in my communism. So like, it makes me a little uncomfortable. But it's fine. Most people who are using it are not actually tankies who want to put me in jail.
Right. Okay.
Appreciate
it. And then I just had one more, if that's okay.
Sure.
What would you say to a leftist who is not particularly interested in electoral politics in terms of shaping the overtone window to a more left perspective for the general public?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the second part of that was. A leftist who's not interested in electoral politics because they think it's going to shift the Overton window.
What would I say to them about what?
Like, what would be like your critique of that position, or how would you maybe convince them that it is useful to participate in electoral politics for, if nothing more, than to shift the Overton window?
Well, first of all, it's not just a question of shifting the Overton window. It is a question of actual real policies. I mean, take a look at
we're talking about it in terms of the Overton window, though, right?
Well, I mean, forget the idea of what where the Overton window is in terms of what's possible in terms of the conversation. I mean, I got stories here today about a 37-year-old woman who's going to be appointed to the federal judiciary for a lifetime appointment. She will probably, it's possible someone like that could end up on the Supreme Court, who, is a theocrat. I've got a story today about 200 million tons of CO2 that is going to be dumped into the atmosphere annually because of rollbacks. Never mind, imagining like the opportunity cost of what a different administration would do. I think the EPA didn't allow flyovers over a hurricane area to find out if the air was toxic by a NASA plane that could measure that. I mean, forget the Overton window. There are material differences between the parties. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are getting Medicaid across the country because a Democrat won their governorship. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who still don't because their governor is a Republican. I mean,
I don't think, I feel like people misunderstand me when I talk about this. I'm not saying that those policy manifestations don't matter. I'm saying that they themselves are the manifestations of the larger social forces bubbling up from below, and the balance of
Right.
forces. So
Right,
to
and
your
I
friend,
agree.
I would say,
I guess in discourse, I've just come across people from the left, whether they be anarchists or revolutionaries or whatever, who just write off electoral politics on the grounds that it won't do anything for their very specific narrow causes, and I just kind of wanted some ideas on how I could like combat
That's
that.
not much. That's not showing much solidarity, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Can I
would say
answer
that's
as
either-
someone
that
who
was-
is
that's
probably
either
closest to your
like-
friend?
That's either like super non-solidarity or incredibly delusional on their part. And so, but if they had any kind of good faith or broader strategic sense, and they're not just trying to do like a little subcult as performance art instead of politics, I think you could definitely say that, again, even just the 2016 Sanders campaign. I mean, I literally know people. It's comical to me. Like, I know people who were totally disengaged in that primary and maybe were like, yeah, I guess Bernie, maybe even I guess Hillary. And now all of a sudden they're like, I don't think you read Mao fairly, which, you know, is its own kind of ridiculous thing in its own way. But it's like that whole campaign, that energy of that event generated, including obviously much more productive and serious things than that, a huge amount of energy in social movements and even just like a countercultural discourse on the legitimate important ideas from things like anarchism. So when people come at it that way, they're either just disconnected from reality or really deluded or not in solidarity, or if they're in good faith and smart, they got to enlarge their strategic lens.
I mean, look, I believe that activists will get the most bang for our buck when we come into direct confrontation with capital, either in the workplace or in terms of tenant organizing against your landlord, any number of things. So if your friends are doing those things, 24/7, I don't really care if they're getting involved in electoral politics, because there are plenty of people for whom that is their thing. As long as they're, engaging on some level, fine. That's more than most people are doing. I think, again, it is like more of a dialectic than some people think. Like, electoral politics do play a role, and they do have a feedback effect into all of the other stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Just tell them to be smart.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've said that myself. If you're
Appreciate
100% working against DHS and for housing and tenants' rights. On the other hand, I mean, there is a thing though where it's like the most radical interventions in building that possibility is unbelievably important, and you're still going to run up against the policy mechanisms.
Appreciate the call. Let's go to the phones again. Calling from a 719 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Colton from Omaha.
Colton from Omaha. What's happening?
I just want to ask you guys, I think, two quick questions. So first off, with the Green New Deal and the way that it rolled out, do you think there should have been some plans included there to maybe negotiate some sort of cut down on the carbon emissions of China and India?
I mean, I suppose you could have, put that in the preface. But the bottom line is, look, we're going to have to come to the table with something. And it is implied by anybody who has any good faith in terms of this issue knows that we need to lead the way. And
we're also behind China and India.
And I mean, if you're asking from
what they're doing,
I mean, they're in some areas, right? We're behind. I mean, I guess if you're saying from a political standpoint, from a talking point, but I think we're past that. To be honest with you, I think the real fight here is going to be just how dramatic is this going to be, and I don't think the idea that we're going to also negotiate with these other countries, which is sort of an obvious feature. If we're ever in a position to actually execute a Green New Deal, there's definitely going to be a political will to negotiate and to work with other countries to get them to fight climate change as well. I just don't think that rhetorically is, would be enough to convince people. But, with that said, I mean, I guess. But, I mean, if someone says, like, well, it doesn't matter what we do because China and India are going to do X, Y, and Z, that is, I don't think that's a sincere argument. Because there's nothing that our action, let me put it this way, there's nothing that within the Green New Deal that inhibits or prohibits our ability to do that.
Well, also,
Yeah,
it's
when
also
people
just
make
not
that-
accurate.
when people
Like,
make that
again,
argument,
China and India.
it's not-
But listen, you got to just know this empirically, or else the whole argument falls apart. China and India, both of which are unbelievably problematic governments. So I am not one to idolize either, obviously, Modi or the People's Republic of China. But Modi, India is a leader in solar power and renewable energy, and China is aggressively transitioning to post-carbon. I mean, there's still massive pollution problems because it's industrializing and there's a huge amount of problems there. But the premise that they're not doing something is wrong. And also, if you want to have an international binding agreement that obligates everybody, you need to have an international binding agreement. If the Green New Deal, if the preface said we encourage other countries to adopt this model, that would be great. But it wouldn't be appropriate for a Chinese policy document to mandate a Green New Deal in the United States, nor would it be appropriate for them to mandate China take action either in that specific way.
Appreciate the call.
No, I disagree with that entirely.
What do you disagree with?
Because the thing is that what are China's intentions? China's intentions are to expand their own economy and to really focus on their own internal development, while the U.S. is, at least on one side of the aisle, being more internationally minded and being worried about the world. If China wanted to push forward a plan to save the planet in effect, then yeah, they would include in their documents policies or intentions to institute international plans to save the planet. And when you say
China supports Paris
the kind of
Accords,
argument
they
that
do.
goes,
They do. You're wrong. We're the one who's not a signature to the Paris Accords, dude. We're not. They are.
well, I'm just saying if the roles were reversed.
What?
But they're not.
But they're
We're
not.
talking about reality.
In reality, China's
Yeah,
doing
we're talking about reality, and you said it wouldn't be appropriate if China said the U.S. should do X, Y, and Z in order to save the planet. And I'm saying it would be appropriate if that was China's intentions. And I'm saying it would be appropriate if we, the U.S., worrying about the planet, instituted a Green New Deal style plan to cut down our own carbon emissions, but also looked at the carbon emissions of other countries and said, listen, these are problems. If we don't get behind these things, it's going to ruin the planet.
That's
we
the
cut our
Paris
carbon emissions
process.
to zero.
There is a global process of which China and
I'm not
India
even clear
are
on
a
what
part
you're saying
of.
here. You're saying that
Dude,
we
you're
have the ability.
incoherent.
I mean, we don't have the ability to pass a law that's going to force anybody to do anything other than our own country. You realize that, right?
Yeah, I realize that, but there should be plans laid out for how we can come to the negotiating table and try
there
to
is
ease
one.
going
We
on.
just stepped away from it. It was the Paris Accords, which was literally like everybody agreed that it was all it was basically a plan to make a plan.
Right.
And we said we're not going to participate even in the plan to make a plan, while the rest of the world is making plans to make a plan.
Right. I don't agree with the Trump administration's decision to pull out of the Paris agreements, but Democrats who are pushing for a Green New Deal, like the fact sheet says, if we cut our carbon emissions to zero and we still have 40% of our emissions, which 40% of emissions, if you combine China and India, that's about 40%, we're still going to be screwed. So if we're putting together a Green New Deal, why shouldn't Democrats also have just a slight mention in there about India or China?
Well, I mean, I think the point is that it's implied, and we've just both said you could put it in the preface, but all it would be is window dressing. None of it would be actionable, and if there is a political will to do a Green New Deal, there is no possible scenario where there also won't be a political will to engage with the rest of the world to deal with climate change.
Yeah, so Yanis Varoufakis is explicitly running on it in Europe, and so that you could have a corollary. In China, Jeremy Rifkin
the premise
is advising. Yeah, the premise
All right, but
is
appreciate the
ridiculous.
call, though. Thank
I'll
you.
say this about that. one thing that does work against solving the climate change problem within the global capitalist system is competition, right? Because as long as all the different countries are competing on the market to, have the best economy, it does look like kind of a dick move for the U.S. to turn around and say to all these developing nations, hey, I know that we used the environment as an infinite free gift when we were industrializing, but we know more information now and you can't do that. So in that context, the U.S. would probably have to buy them off or just give them tons and tons of aid and technologies.
They are doing it. They're
I'm not just
literally
talking about China and India. So in that context, it is a barrier, but not necessarily insurmountable. Oh, and doesn't discredit the Green New Deal.
Well, and also in the areas you're talking about, those countries are not a problem, frankly, in terms of
They don't have the same. They're not spewing the same amount.
They're not spewing the same amount at all. If anything, they're just vulnerable because they will literally could be sinking underwater in a couple of years.
All right. This could be the final call of the day. Calling from a 937 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey there, this is Aiden in Tallahassee.
Aiden in Tallahassee. What's on your mind?
I just had a couple quick things to mention. I'll try to be fast. I did want to say that, first and foremost, thank you guys for everything that you do. Thank you, Michael, for being kind of an inspiration for trying to be politically active. So just thank you guys for that. Other than that, I did want to mention that I'm an education major at Florida State, and just on Monday, I got involved with my first kind of political activism sort of thing. The teachers union here rallied on the steps of the Florida Capitol building to promote for more school funding because we are 45th out of 50 states for teacher pay. We just get railed for funding. And so it was just really great to actually work with the teachers union as a student myself. Getting involved in that was such a great process. I remember a couple of weeks ago, somebody called in and thanked Michael for mentioning that getting politically involved makes you feel better about the political process. And so that's what kind of inspired me to do this, and I can confirm. So if anybody else is listening and they're thinking about it, absolutely get out there and do that. And I did just want to mention in that process, I got such a good sense of worker solidarity that I'd never seen before. So seeing so many vehicles that would be stereotyped as sort of I guess Trumper cars or something, like big trucks with camo on them, or just local businesses honking and showing support for us, giving us thumbs up and everything like that. Just people from all different types of backgrounds showing support for what we were doing, trying to raise awareness for more teacher funding, more school funding. And then I also did just want to bring attention to, if anybody else is in Florida, to bring attention to House Bill 2055. Not 2055, 7055. My apologies. And it says that somewhere in the text that if our unions don't meet 50% dues paying members from the whole body of population that could be a part of the union, then they will be disbanded. And so that's just a big issue that I'm worried about. Being a future teacher, I don't want to have to not have a union, not have anybody fighting for collective bargaining and everything like that.
What union are you guys represented by? Is it the AFT or the NEA?
It was local. It was the Leon Classroom Teachers Association. So for our county.
Okay. And Florida is not a so-called right to work state. Is that right?
I don't believe so. We may, if we are, it would have been fairly recently, I believe. But I don't want to speak on that, not knowing fully.
All right. Appreciate the call. It's good to hear. Keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
All right, let's just finish off this thing. There's a morning consult poll that is out. Brendan, do you have that? I sent that over to you. Interesting, particularly at this stage, because look, there is Bernie Sanders did have, and I think still has, some challenges in regards to older African Americans. In the Democratic primary, I think there has been undoubtedly a concerted effort on his part to reach out and to become more sophisticated in some ways in the way that he uses language and
connecting
fashions
the dots.
Yeah, and fashions his message, and I think he is doing a good job in recognizing that. I think he said during maybe it was the rally that there are disparities within the disparities in terms of the experience of people of color. But this is pretty fascinating, and it's early enough where it's sort of tough to tell what the meaning of something like this is. But a Morning Consult poll shows that Joe Biden is yet to announce, but I think it's anticipated, comes in first place amongst African American voters at 32%. Which is on some level to be expected. He's obviously associated with Barack Obama, who is hugely popular in the African American community. He's also very associated with the Democratic Party, which again, particularly for older African Americans, has a lot of institutional importance. Sanders comes in a close second at 28%. Biden does better with white people at this point. Wait till Biden actually gets back out there and campaigns by himself. I have a feeling.
Good luck when you're not standing next to Barack Obama, you prick.
I mean, in all honesty, the advantage that Sanders has when we see these numbers is that they are reflective of, in many respects, his floor. Right? He may not have any growth. We just don't know. But this is pretty much his floor because he's been fully exposed and vetted over the course of a primary and since then. Largely. I mean, it's possible, that people will care about, his drinking parties in Russia or whatever it is. But
love him even more.
But someone like Joe Biden hasn't campaigned in a primary as the top of the ticket in 8 years, 10 years. And so I think people are going to remember why this guy didn't win.
Well,
multiple primaries.
Well, yeah, it was like about 2%. Can I just add? I mean, another takeaway from this I'm seeing from Grimm, and this tracks perfectly, and is just, again, it's a beautiful. I know it's early, but a number to counter all of the spin and propaganda. Bernie Sanders' biggest problem is with Democrats who make more than $100,000 a year and who have a graduate degree, because it's class politics. And then, as of now, too, the fuller layout is that among African American voters, as you said, 32 Biden, 28 Sanders. I would assume very soft with Biden. We'll see. I mean, I think the big question is Harris. She's at 14%. And then, you get Booker at 6, Warren at 4, O'Rourke at 4, someone else at 4.
But you also have to understand that with the rest of the people in the field, like Harris on down, the name awareness is going to be extremely low.
My sense would actually, and I think, though, and this is anecdotal, but I think Harris that really applies to. So we'll see with her. She might have a really high ceiling. But I actually think Cory Booker is somebody who's relatively been in the national profile since 2005. I don't think that bodes so well.
It's surprising to see him 4%, with Beto O'Rourke ahead of him, because it's hard to imagine that he has less a name recognition than Beto O'Rourke. And if he does, that's also indicative of something.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I would love to have Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders be the two front runners who battle it out. I think it'd be very clarifying on a lot of things, and people couldn't use disingenuous identity politics as an attack on Bernie.
And also, according to this poll, Harris has 71% name recognition. So we'll see, but that means
lot.
People are aware of her. And I mean, not to the extent of Booker, but she's been a political star for the last 2 years.
All right, folks. On that note, I am sorry, callers. We just have run out of time. We have still 18 people hanging on the phone, but we can't do it. But the show will be back tomorrow and the next day. then the following Monday, then the following Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and then the following Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. Check the New York City DOE website for when our next vacation is. All right, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and